We're going to jump back into the Word again today. So if you have your Bible, why don't you turn it to John chapter 11. And we're kind of back into our Living Jesus series, which we've been in for several weeks now. And we've been discovering these I am statements of Jesus throughout the book of John. So it's been a way we've been studying this Gospel of John. And the way we've been doing it is saying Jesus says certain things about himself in John and these I am statements. And we're a good portion of the way through that. We have a few more weeks on this and we'll be done. But today we're in John chapter 11 where Jesus says the words, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, it's interesting in that because I know that there are those of us in here right now who believe in God. After all, this is a church, right? There probably are people here who believe in God. Even in a truck driving school, it's probably people that believe in the Lord here, which is a good thing. There are also those of us in here who don't believe in God. And then there are people who are on the fence. Then there are people who are kind of like, I'm not sure what I believe. I might believe in God. I'm hearing it. I'm understanding it. And I'm glad that all of those types of people are here, to be honest with you. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think churches should be filled with all of those types of people. So if you're wondering, like, if you're the only one here who doesn't believe in God, you're not, all right? You're not the only person. And it's great that you're here this morning. But let me just assume this morning that there is a God. Again, after all, this is church. I'm a pastor, so let's assume that, right? But let's assume there is. And so what we do with God when we think about him is that we pull all these preconceived ideas about God into our ideas of God, whether we like to or not. It's one of the things we do as people. We have expectations of who God is. And it's based a lot on our childhood. It's based a lot on what we view the Bible says or our upbringing or even some of the religious studies we've done. We have these expectations of who God is. And all of us bring those into our faith, into what we think of God. And as part of those preconceived ideas, we have to reconcile something about God pretty quickly. And you've probably wrestled with this yourself at some point. And you have to say, okay, if there is a God, I'll take that it takes faith to believe that. To some level, it takes all kinds of faith to believe there is a God. We don't see him. And maybe you said, I'm going to try this out. But maybe you've said to yourself, but there's all types of heartache and pain in the world. There's all this crisis out there. And if there really is a God, why did he allow all of this stuff to happen? Because you might say to yourself, if I were God, I might make a pretty good God, by the way, I would do things very, very differently. I would have chosen to do the world differently so there wouldn't be pain, there wouldn't be suffering, there wouldn't be all of this brokenness out there. And I think we have all wrestled with that at some level. Now, let me just tell you, even people who believe in God wrestle with that, even today. Like, I just want to be honest with you and say there are times to myself when I say, why is there so much brokenness in the world? How can that possibly happen? How can the atrocity of life be real? And how can I live in a world that was created by a good God who loves us? I believe that. I believe that's what the Bible says. And yet there's all this crisis in the world. And I wrestle with that sometimes. I kind of sit back and I go, really? Is this the way life is supposed to be? So there's a couple ways that I end up with that. And that I go, okay, so if that's the case and I wrestle with this and you're wrestling with this, it leaves us with a couple ideas about God. And that are these big ideas. Number one, either God's aloof, he doesn't really care, he's left us to figure it out, he's disinterested and uninvolved in our world. Maybe he created everything, he stepped back and he's like, all right, you do your own thing. You guys are set. I did the big job, I did the heavy lifting by creating everything. I gave you guys a mind and the work ethic and all that kind of stuff. And now it's your job to make sure everything doesn't go badly. And God just kind of sits there on the throne like a benevolent king and doesn't really care much what goes on. He just does his thing. Or secondly, maybe there's a sense that God has a different perspective on the things that are going on in the world. Have you thought about that before? So those are kind of the options that we have to weigh at some level. Because if there really is brokenness that we all wrestle with and we struggle with that idea, either he is disinterested and not involved, or he has a different perspective. He has something else in mind with all the brokenness in things that are going on. I've noticed, quite honestly, that people either have this bad view of God, that he's uninterested, he's got better things to do, and so they completely reject him. And it's not as often that people say something along the lines of, God's completely involved in my life situation. It's just that he has something different than I would expect right now. was talking to a guy this week. It was really funny. He works for Amazon.com, and he has a great job. He oversees all the interns at Amazon.com. It's a large job. He's got about a $250 million job of overseeing all the internships from all over the world. And he says in his job, he sometimes runs into the CEO, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He says it's really interesting because he walked into the bathroom one day, and Bezos' security team was out front standing there, and he kind of went like, what's going on here? He wandered in, and he's like, I'm standing near a urinal next to Jeff Bezos, who's worth a lot of money here. And he's like, hey, and Bezos is like, hi. And he's like, that's as close as I can get to that guy. I can't get any closer to him because he's got security around him. He goes, Bezos is somewhat approachable. He'll say hi to me, and he uses the same bathrooms. He doesn't have like the private bathroom somewhere in the office. But he's aloof, a little disinterested in things that go on because he's so important in the organization. Some of us kind of have that view of God. Some of us kind of think, oh, God's really busy. He couldn't possibly be involved in the things that are going on. Earth is like God's business. He's the CEO of it, and he just sits back and lets all the peons do the work, if you will. Now, it's a weird view of God. I love how Pastor David was here last week, and he talked about how unmet expectations were a roadblock to faith, if you were here. In other words, he talked about this idea that sometimes doubts arise in us because our expectations of what God should be or what he should do don't allow us to see him for who he really is. And we wrestle with that. And we say, I have these expectations of God. I have these things that I believe about him. And if he doesn't fit those needs that I have or these expectations I have, then he must not be real. In other words, we kind of give ourselves a little bit too much credit, I think, in a lot of ways, not picking on you. But let me just ask you this question to kind of intro John 11 today. What if your expectations are wrong? What if your expectations are wrong? What if your idea of what God is or who God is not correct? And what if God has a different way of doing things than we might not imagine, that we might not understand, and in some ways we can't even explain? I'll just admit that. Sometimes God does things we can't explain. What if he has a different perspective on the way things happen in our world? And maybe it's even a true and better perspective than our own. It's hard to believe that, right? I mean, we're pretty smart people, I think. You probably got advanced degrees and you've worked really hard and got where you are. And so you probably think, I know the way things should happen in the world. If only I were king, I would do such and things would be fine. But what if God has a different perspective? And what if your expectations are wrong? I haven't talked about this story at Imprint Church before, except mentioning a few details. But some of you know my story of when I was a pastor of this small church in Seattle. It's a unique story. I want to tell this story today because I think it lines up with something we're going to talk about in John chapter 11. A few years ago, I was serving at this church, this little church in downtown Seattle. It was standing at a crossroads. It was unique because this church was deciding what to do with their future. They were out of money, and they didn't really have enough people to support the ministry. They're a large building down there. And we as a congregation, we were a congregationally run vote, so we had to vote together on what to do. And we were standing at this crossroads and deciding what to do. And it was tough because, when you get a group of people together, it's amazing how they don't see eye to eye many times. And it's amazing how much Christians like to bark at each other and get mad at each other. Yeah, it's true. It really happens. Christians even get mad at each other. And in this particular case, it was happening. This church was really big. It was a large building. It had a lot of support that was needed. There was one staff member and then a part-time staff member. I was the full-time staff. We had a part-time staffer. And we had 50 people in a 60,000 square foot building in Seattle. Huge. One of the largest churches in Seattle, if you can believe that. And we were down there, and so we had talked about all these options, and the board got together, and we decided one of the things we should probably do is try to merge with another large church down in Seattle. What if we merged with this church? We'd bring some life back into it. We get some money going again because we can't afford going. I was on a timeline because I knew that in about 2 months, my paycheck was going away. They couldn't support me anymore, and I knew that things were going to be rough for my family. We were living next door to the church in a parsonage there, and it was really tough because we were right in the middle of the whole thing. And it was really interesting. We talked about this church. We're like, what if we merge with this other church in Seattle, and if we do that, then we'll be able to stay alive. Now, the problem was that this church in Seattle had a reputation to it. You either loved this church or you hated this church, to be honest with you. And both of these people existed in our congregation. There were people who didn't like this church and they yelled about it and they got frustrated. There were people who loved the church, thought it would be great. And there were people, I'll kind of put myself in the middle because I always like to throw myself in the middle, right? I was kind of like, I'm not sure. I think it's the right thing. But this is the thing. Our board got together. We prayed about it. We asked the Lord if he wanted us to merge with this church. My wife and I spent time. We fasted. We prayed. We worked really hard on deciding this. And we finally said, yes, I think we're supposed to merge with this church. And Kelly and I agonized over this decision. In fact, we were pretty sure if we pushed the church, this merger with this church as a congregation, our church would survive. We'd live, and we might actually thrive in Seattle. Not only that, the Larsons wouldn't be out of a job and out of a house and home, if you will, which might be a good thing as well. Kelly and I even asked the lead pastor at one point of this other church and said to him, what if I don't fit with this church? Would I be out of a job? Would you boot me out at some point? Would this not happen? And our expectations were a little unique going into it because we weren't sure what our future looked like with this church. And so we set up this takes 6 months for us to get there. We set up this whole process of asking our congregation, what do you think? We brought one of the pastors of the church, the lead pastor over, spent time with our congregation. He hung out with our congregation of 50-some people, answered questions. We talked about the merger, what it would look like, and we set up this fund for all the missionaries that we couldn't support anymore. We did all of these amazing things, and at the very end of the day, our board went back and we said, this is going to be amazing. This merger is going to go through, and God's going to get all the glory, and things are going to survive, and it's just going to be an amazing thing. And so we got down to it, and we had to vote. And so we sent out these letters to our entire congregation, which is part of the law of the state of Washington. We sent these letters out, and we said, this is what it looks like. You need to come vote on this on such and such Sunday. And there's a whole lot of the story I'm not telling in this process, but I don't have time to do that today. And we said to our congregation, this is what's going to happen. If we vote yes, that we merge with this church, we survive. And it'll be awesome. God will do great things. And our board believes in this, and we think it's the right thing to do. But if we vote no, and we literally said this, our church closes next Sunday. We're done. There's no more. We don't have Sunday services. We close as a church, and that's the end of this church as you know it. And so we thought this was going to be a big win. So we got to the vote day, and we rolled in there, and my wife and I recused ourselves from voting, actually, just because there was a conflict of interest thing going on there, as I had a job waiting on the other side. So we stepped out, and I went there, and I preached a short sermon and talked to our congregation about the exciting thing that's going to happen. It's going to be amazing. God's going to do great things as he builds life back into our church. And then Kelly and I went to a restaurant. We went out and hung out down at the U Village and hung out there for a few minutes, and we were waiting for the vote to come back. And I'll never forget the phone call as I looked, and there's the chairman of our board, or the speaker of our board, if you will, and he calls me and says, hey, Darren. I said, hey, how's it going? He says, yeah, the vote didn't pass this morning. I thought he was kidding. I was like, no, you're joking, right? Like, didn't God say that this was going to happen? Didn't God actually offer this as like the thing to do? So is that it? Yeah, that's it. That's all there is. And I remember feeling like, are you kidding me? And I said to Kelly, it's a no. It's a no. And I remember the tears streaming down her eyes and just feeling that weight, are you kidding me? Is this not happening? See, it sounds like a win. We had 64% of the vote. But in the state of Washington, you need 67% of the vote to pass. We just needed a couple people to change their votes, but it didn't happen. And at the end of that, our board got together, and we all went down to, I think we went to a pub and grill down there in the U Village. I think we all needed adult beverage at that point. The Bible says not to get drunk, but it does say that wine is given to cheer the heart of man. So we needed some cheering at that point. So we all went down to this pub and grill down there, and we just grieved together. And we just said, are you kidding me? Our expectations were this. And yet this happened. Like, where were you, God? Why didn't you show up here? Our church is gone. We didn't show up. And that was the end of that church. That church died that day, and it's trying to come back to life again even today. But the biggest thing that I take away from that I even think of today, is that God didn't live up to my expectations. I was expecting him to do a miracle there. Now, in some ways, I'm happy it didn't happen now in the retrospect, 4 years later. If it happened, Imprint Church wouldn't be alive today, most likely. We'd still be down in the Seattle area, and we wouldn't have met any of you fine folks that are out there as well. And in some way, retrospect is amazing, but at the time, it was painful. And it was one of those things where I still have question marks about it. Even today, I have question marks about it. So there's two ways to view that. One, God wasn't involved. He was doing his own thing. He didn't really care about the vote. Or two, God had a different perspective on the way things should have happened. Now let me switch gears for a second, because I think it has to do with our passage today as well. Could it be in one of the most emotionally charged things in life, and that is death, that God has a different perspective about that as well? Could it be that God has a different perspective about death than we do? That we might say death is crazy. Death is not supposed to be right. Death is painful and death is brutal. And yet, maybe God has a different perspective about death. Death comes at us so unexpected. It's amazing. Like when I was coaching my baseball team this week, my son's baseball team, I was out there and it was kind of a fun experience because I was coaching this kid on how to bat, and we always tell the kids to stand behind the fence. And if you know me on Facebook, you know this happened already, so I'll give you a warning. But I was down there and I was helping this kid learn how to bat, and I was just kind of stepping back from him. And while he took a swing, and he swung late on the bat. And if you're a little wheezy about blood, you can not look at the screens here in just a second. But he took a swing and the ball flew off the bat and it hit me straight in the nose. And this is what I looked like right here. Oh. Is there a picture of it? No, there's not. Oh, I thought there was a picture. Maybe there's not. So I had this blood pouring down my face. It was the grossest thing I've ever seen. We'll fix that for a second. If you want to see it, you got to come back to second service, all right? There was blood like pouring down my nose. It was so, and I'm a baseball player. I couldn't get my glove up, and I had a glove on my hand like an idiot, right? You know, boom, right in the nose. And it busted my nose most likely because I was black and blue, and I can breathe better out of my left nostril than I've ever been able to breathe in about 20 years. Death comes at us so unexpected, kind of like that. And we have these expectations about it, and we go, what is death really for? Why is it part of our life? It's so easy to look at the world today and see the pain and suffering and say that God is not interested. He's got other things to do. We were hit with a story close to home this week, even at SPU, where we noticed death came unexpectedly for many of us. Many of us have connections there, went to school there, have kids there, have grandkids there. And there was this unexpected story of a tragedy, an atrocity that happened there. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, where death come unexpected. But maybe God had a plan in that. Might I say that today? Let's read together in John 11, verses 1 through 6. And I want to look at Jesus' plan in death in some ways. Let's read this together. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Let's stop there for a second. What would you do if you heard your friend was gravely ill? Wouldn't you hop in the car immediately and drive to go see your friend? Like, in my mind, one of the most interesting things about John 11 is that the interaction with Jesus when he hears that Lazarus, a close friend of his, is dying. Like, I'm thinking to myself that I would hop in the car, drive wherever it needs to be, hop in an airplane. If one of my closest friends were dying, I would be there by his side to be with him during this time. And yet Jesus here waits for 2 days for some reason. And it's interesting, we might expect Jesus to be more like Jim Craig from The Man from Snowy River, get on a horse and cruise there as fast as he can when he hears that Lazarus is ill. But he said, no, I'm going to wait a couple days. I'm going to wait to see what happens here. In fact, Jesus responds to the news by making comments about Lazarus here, which is very interesting. In fact, let's read a little bit further in John 11:7 and following. Then after this, he says to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of the world. Skip down to verse 11. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus has spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to the fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus has already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give to you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha responds, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. When she said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Let's keep reading for a few verses here. Verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he called out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of the Pharisees, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Jesus responds to this news, this interesting story. He responds to this story in a way that we would not expect, in fact. He makes 2 comments on the illness of Lazarus. His first comment is that his sickness will not prove fatal. And his second comment is that this will be for the glory of God, so that Jesus will get the glory through this. You know, in some ways, this tells us a lot about God's perspective on death, to be honest with you. This tells us a lot about what his perspective on suffering and on pain and some of those things that are there. This shows us even the view of Jesus' sense of urgency, where he sticks around for 2 more days. And he has this timeline that's not in our timeline. And it's very different than we would expect as people. I mean, God is inevitably going to do things in his own timing, his own way. And when it feels like maybe God is disinterested, like when Jesus hangs out and doesn't head to Bethany right away, maybe it's just that he's doing something different. He's up to something that we might not know. John 11 shows us something here about God when things kind of feel off, when life doesn't make sense, that maybe God has a different perspective of things than we do. And in some ways, that's a promise we have to hold on to as people. When we face things like death or unexpected stories, like even my story of a broken church that never got fixed, we have to understand that maybe God's doing something different than we expected him to. And we can either despair, lose our faith in God and say, I don't want anything to do with him again, or we can say maybe he's got a different perspective on the way things in our world work, and maybe even it's a better perspective than mine. When we're ravaged by the despair of life, it's actually difficult to believe that God is with us. I admit that. I understand that, and I feel that with you. But his perspective is different, and he uses circumstances around him to bring him glory. That's a tough thing for us to get. But there's a principle in this. I think there's a huge principle in John 11. And I think the principle is this. Believe God even when you can't see him working. Believe God when you can't see him working. That's probably one of the best times to actually believe in him. Understand he's there working behind the scenes. And maybe it's not even behind the scenes so much. Maybe he's actually bringing us through situations like that to bring himself glory and to turn our eyes on him to help us realize something about himself that maybe we are frustrated with. Maybe we don't like the idea. Maybe we want nothing to do with God because he hasn't met with our expectations in the way that we wanted him to. But here is God working in the scenes in John 11. He had something else going on, and the principle is this: believe in God even when you can't see him working. Jesus brings his disciples to Bethany. When he arrives, Martha sort of accuses Jesus. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. I have expectations for you. Why aren't you doing what I want you to do? Silence would be deafening there. How many of us have said similar things in our lives? Where were you, God, when my parents divorced? Where were you when my husband became an alcoholic and started beating me? How many have said things like that in our lives? Like, where are you at? And yet, in some mysterious way and painful way, God comes through in some of the deepest, darkest, most emotional moments of life. And the reason I know that is because he comes through with Mary and Martha here. Jesus shows up here in a weird way, in a way that Martha were pointing the finger and saying, you're not doing what I wanted you to do, God. You're not doing my expectations. And Jesus says, I've got something else in mind. Jesus answers, your brother will rise again. I love how Martha says the good Sunday school answer here. I know that he'll rise again in the last day. But Jesus clarifies, no. You're missing it. I am the resurrection and the life. Like right now. I want to offer life right now in the midst of despair and brokenness. Believe in me now, not in the future. Believe in me even right now. That's amazing. That's hard for us to get, that even in the midst of brokenness, even in the midst of the most painful situations that God might be saying to us, believe in me right now. Believe in me in that dark time. It gets intense here. Mary says the same things to Jesus in John 11:28 through 32, probably mourning the loss of her brother, that same accusation, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But then it gets deeply intense in John 11:33 through 35. We see some of the most human moments of Jesus here, where he vacillates between emotions in a quick way. In fact, the Greek is really light here. I'm not sure if the translators weren't sure of what to write here, because the Bible actually says that Jesus is furious about it. And then it says he wept about it as well. So he has this range of emotions. The Greek word is so intense there that Jesus is furious with them. And I'm not sure why. I look at that and I thought about this all this week, and I thought, why is he furious at Martha? Is he furious at Mary that they were kind of accusing him of not being there at the time they wanted him to? Or was it something different? Or was he furious about brokenness in the world? Was he furious about that? And I tend to lean on that one. Because what does he do next? He weeps. He moves from this moment of this is not right. This is terrible. Things are not happening. And then he starts weeping. He experiences the whole gamut of human emotion when it comes to death. Verse 33, Jesus was angry at death. In fact, even the language there, if you can hear this, it says the Bible says that he got the wind knocked out of him. Made him angry, furious. And then in verse 35, he felt deep sorrow. And we see one of the most human moments in Jesus' ministry there where he weeps. He weeps with people who are broken as well. I think there's something interesting about this, and that's that death is bad. Jesus came from this place where there was no death, there was no brokenness, and yet he comes to earth to walk among us where some reason God has chosen to use death as a way to bring us to God, as a way to show us what sin has done to separate us from God. Death is being used by God to help us see God clearly. And yet Jesus weeps at that and says, this is not the way I wanted things to be. And instead of standing away and God saying, I don't really want to enter into that world of brokenness, God, through Jesus, enters into the world of brokenness and says, I'll take part in that as well. And he experiences the whole gamut of human emotion when it comes to death, where he says, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. And then he says, I am sad about it as well. So it's not that God is disinterested. It's not that he has better things to do. It might be that he's up to something different that we would expect. I think when some of us see that Lazarus' illness will not finally issue in death, and when Jesus says for the glory of God, we think that's not cool. How could God allow something like that to happen? How could God allow a death? This family, if you put yourself in these people's shoes and you go, wow, This is tough. They're losing brother here. The family, a community. Bethany was a small town. Everyone probably knew Lazarus. And when he dies here, the whole community is mourning. We see that here as the Jewish people are mourning together. And there are people that are mourning with the family at this point. And yet God says, I'm going to use it for my glory. And we think, how crazy is that? That's not a great way. Couldn't he have chosen to show his glory in another way? But then we go back and say, oh, that's the expectations thing again. I have these expectations on God. I wouldn't use death as a way to bring glory to myself, but then here's the story of Jesus when he actually does it. We will not understand always what God is saying or doing, but in one of the most critical points of misunderstanding, it's the issue of life and death in some ways. One of the most critical points of us misunderstanding who God is this issue of human suffering, of human death. And it sets Christianity really apart from all the other religions, and it sets the God of the Bible above every other God. Because if we miss the truth about life and death, we'll miss everything about Christ and about what God has done through Christ. And what is that truth? It's this. If you know Jesus Christ this morning, you will have life even in death. And death is not the final enemy. That's the truth. Even in the midst of death and brokenness and some of the things that happen, God can use those for his glory, and it is not the final enemy for us. We can have life even in the midst of death. If you have your Bibles, would you flip over to 1 Corinthians 15 for me real quick? I want to read some of 1 Corinthians 15 to you. I'll have the words on the screen behind me as well. Scripture affirms that death is not the final enemy for us as people, and it's amazing what we're about to read. Just soak these words in for just a minute with me. Paul writes these words in verse 1. Now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me. Skip down to verse 12. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. Do you catch those words? Let me stop there for just a second. If there's no hope in life after death, then we're the most pitied people in the world. Then we're believing something for no reason at all. If God doesn't use his death for his glory to bring life out of it, then we're pitied people. That's interesting words there. And I don't think we like that at some level, because it doesn't seem like something we would do, and yet God does that. Look at verse 20 and following again. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all shall be made alive. Let's skip down just a little more to verse 50 and read the ending of this, what Paul is going to conclude about this. I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For the perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. To the person who believes in Jesus, to the person who lives in this mystery, to the person who says, yeah, I can understand that death is not the way I would do things, and yet God's going to use it for his glory, we have great hope in future life. We have great hope in life even coming out of death. Our enemy is no longer death. It doesn't have the final say. So if that's not the enemy, do you want to know what the final enemy is of humanity? It's you. You're your own worst enemy in some ways. Your own expectations, my own expectations that I bring into this idea is the worst enemy that we have. Because death no longer can have a hold on us if we believe in Jesus. And yet that roadblock for us to have expectations of God and not have him meet him and then move through that roadblock is the biggest enemy you will have to have hope in life after death. That's what Jesus means when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will never die. You have great hope in life after death. You know, when it comes down to it, I don't know why Jesus waited for those 2 days. I don't know. Maybe it was to let Lazarus die, to let things happen. I mean, maybe Lazarus was dead for 4 days, right? So I'm not sure why he didn't rush over, be with the family immediately. I'm not sure why he didn't take the time, I got to go, I got to get there, I got to be with the family. And yet, in his mysterious way that he chooses to do things, he went and comforted the people and showed them what it was like to believe in life after death. I don't know why, that's a mystery to me, and I don't know why certain things happen in our world. Those are mysterious. And that's the thing. On the human level, there's really 2 ways to deal with death. Number 1, it's either a problem to be solved, or number 2, it's a mystery we will all experience. The problem to be solved means that we do autopsies to explain deaths. We want to find out why an accident or an atrocity occurred. We even try to prolong life as long as we possibly can. We're all still looking for that fountain of youth, if you will. Moreover, we try so hard to come up with ideas about what happens with life after death. If you want to make a lot of money right now, you write a book about life after death, and you make a lot of money off that one. Not to pick on all those books, but that's what happens, you know. Because people want to know how to solve the problem of death. And yet here's Jesus saying, embrace the mystery of it. Embrace the mystery that we will not experience only death, we'll experience life even in death. That's the way Paul describes this in 1 Corinthians 51. He tells us it's a mystery that we experience that. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he's taking some of the mystery out of the mystery. When Jesus says, I am that person, when we put our faith in him, we realize we have that life after death, and we can experience what he's going to experience and what Lazarus experienced, even on a better place, where Lazarus one day would die again, but one day we will not. We will come to new life in Christ, and I believe that. You know, there's no better place this week to see this than on the campus of Seattle Pacific University. I grieve with them, and I'm proud of them. Did you feel that this way at all this week? I just had this sense of serious grief to the family. I mean, the family of Paul Lee, an SPU freshman from Portland area, the Beaverton area, a Korean-American kid who was gunned down by this man this week, this young man. And I feel so much grief over that. I go, why is that happening? I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't want that to happen. If I were God, I would change that whole thing. I would make sure that didn't happen. We can't explain the problem of what caused that troubled gunman to shoot and kill this young man, nor the other students, and we grieve with them. But you know what sticks with me out of this tragedy? What sticks with me is that the students praying together outside of the hall where the shooting occurred, on the lawn, the vigil that happened. The young woman on the front page of the Seattle Times singing with her hands raised at that prayer vigil with just a look of expectation on her face that Jesus was enough for her in the midst of that tragedy. The front page of the Huffington Post religion section that said, after the shooting at SPU, desolation, consolation, hope. Those words don't go together very often. And yet I read that from SPU and I go, wow, that's amazing. What an amazing thing. They've handled this so well. I'm thankful for the president, Dr. Daniel Martin's leadership when the press barraged him and he calmly and emotionally explained his faith in Jesus Christ that day. With emotion, he could barely hold back the tears if you watched the press conference with him. And I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud because he expressed something that I'm trying to talk about today. Hope in death. Hope in this expectation that Jesus has made a way for us to experience life after death, and that even at something so atrocious, that God can get the glory out of that. And we saw that at SPU this week in a beautiful, beautiful way. And I was so proud of those students and staff, and I grieve with them even today. And it hurts me, and my wife and I and our family have prayed for those families and will continue to. They didn't try to explain it. They didn't solve the problem. They leaned deeply in the promise of a person, to Jesus Christ, is saying, he is the resurrection and the life. I have hope in him. So we either get partial answers or we get great hope. Resurrection is an idea, but it's also a person. And we experience that person and work of Jesus Christ, that we can turn to him and say, I want to know him. I want to experience him, and I want that life after death. So today we're faced with a decision as I close this morning. As I wrap this up, the raising of Lazarus from the death is one of the great dramatic scenes of the entire Bible. I've always wondered to myself why it's only in John. You know, if this is one of the most amazing things that happened, it doesn't show up in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but it shows up in John. You know why? Because John is so focused on life. The word life is used 36 times in the Gospel of John, and it's only used 19 times in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because John wants us to know that there's life in something like this. There's death in our world, there's brokenness, there's sin. We each have it, all of us have it. And yet here is Jesus saying, I'm the resurrection and what? And the life. And you can have that life through me. See, I don't think the idea of punishment after death is as powerful as the image of life after death. I think the idea of life after death becomes the most compelling reason for you and I to believe in Jesus today. It becomes one of the most compelling reasons for us to say, I want to experience that. Because I don't get all the stuff. I don't get the mystery. I don't get that stuff. My expectations are different. But yet if I put my trust in a person who is Jesus Christ, then I get a chance to experience that life after death. And that's a good enough reason to say yes to Jesus this morning. So maybe you're on the fence. Maybe you're one of those people, if we're going to come full circle, that you haven't said yes to Jesus in your life. Maybe you're one of those people that have kind of gone, oh, is this really true? And that you saw the tragedy of this week and you've let roadblocks stand in front of you. Would you tear those roadblocks down this morning and say yes to Jesus, who offers life even in death? That's my great hope for you this morning, and that's a beautiful thing. I want to encourage you to respond to the Lord this morning. We get a chance in just one moment here. We're going to sing some songs, and we're going to get a chance to worship Jesus, the one who gave us this life after death. And you can sing with us as we worship and as we sing these songs. During this time, you're also welcome to come and receive communion. On either table up here, there's a communion table over here that has gluten-free bread on it if you want that. Come up and take that bread, dip it in the cup, and receive that as a way to, the Bible says, proclaim his death and the life that you receive out of that until he comes, which is a great thing. And we do that as an act of worship, as an act of response this morning. We also have a chance to give. On each of our tables up there's a giving basket, and you're welcome to give and thank the Lord for what he's done for you and be generous and give to him. And finally, you can receive prayer. You can pray and receive prayer from people. There'll be prayer partners in the back who'll be more than willing to pray for you, or you can just sit there and reflect upon this idea. Maybe it has been a rough week for you as you've been processing this a little bit. Express that to the Lord. Jesus did not rebuke Martha or Mary for their questions. Where were you when this happened? Instead, he answered by saying, I'm the resurrection and the life. And I would hope that he would do that for you as well this morning if you're dealing with questions and things like that. Would you respond, though? Respond to Jesus this morning? Let's pray about these things together. God, I'm thankful this morning for your goodness. God, I'm thankful that you offer us great hope in Christ. And this morning, Lord, I would pray that you would give us that faith to see you. I pray that you would help us to understand that this is a mystery that we deal with, that death is a mystery, and yet we have expectations when it comes down to it, and sometimes you don't meet our expectations, and we have to say, okay, what do I do with that? And we have to live with that mystery and say, I trust you. I trust that you're the resurrection and the life, and I trust you know what you're doing in that way. And so, Lord, I pray for my dear brothers and sisters. Lord, wherever they're at this morning, I don't know. I don't know if they're facing just questions or expectation issues or whatever it might be. But Lord, would you give them the faith to believe in you, even working behind the scenes in a mysterious way, Lord, I would pray. Help them to say yes to you, to believe in you, to have that great hope in the resurrection of Jesus, who raised Lazarus from the dead, who will raise us from the dead, who we can experience life right now because of. I'm grateful for that this morning, Lord. We trust you. We trust you with this great mystery that you're doing what you want to do. And we worship you because you've given us hope even in the midst of that, Lord. Thanks for that. In Jesus' great name we pray. Amen.